You often hear people talk about idioms in ASL, and they sometimes do so imprecisely. So we're going to differentiate what a real idiom is as compared to other special uses of language. An idiom is a group of words whose meaning is not deducible by looking at the meaning of the individual words. That is, if you were to look at the meaning of the ASL expression train gone or train go, you'd never really expect that that means that I'm not going to repeat myself, because train and go have nothing to do with the conversation, but because they've been used in a certain way for a long time, it turns out to mean something different than you would expect. Sort of like the English idiom, it's raining cats and dogs. Well, you have to know the meaning of each word, but that doesn't give you the meaning, wow, it's raining really hard. It depends on the way that that group of words has been used together. So an idiom is always a group of words used in a certain way that means something different than what you'd expect from looking at the individual words. And your instructor, I'm sure, will spend some time explaining some of the ASL idioms that we have. Now that's different from simply a culturally laden term, or a term that's just difficult to interpret. There are lots of signs in ASL that don't have an English word, and you'd have to use several different English words to express them. Or there are signs in ASL that relate to something cultural about the deaf community that is therefore difficult to interpret to a hearing audience. If you just think of the sign deaf school or deaf institute, if you will, well, it's difficult to express what that means to a hearing person because a hearing person isn't familiar with the culture. That doesn't mean that the sign is an idiom. It just means it's a sign that's hard to translate between languages. There are lots of words in Spanish that don't have an English equivalent. There are lots of words in English that don't have a Spanish equivalent. That doesn't make them an idiom. That just makes them a term that's bound to a culture and that might cause a little bit of trouble for a translator or interpreter. Finally, we sometimes see metaphorical uses of language. We talked about metaphors already in this course, and how it's sometimes expected that that a certain idea will be expressed in a certain way. Lots of signs use the idea of height or moving upward to indicate the idea of having more power. So a person might talk about their job and wanting a promotion using the sign promote, and they might sort of indicate in some way that they're struggling to climb a ladder. And you'd say, well, there's no ladder really involved, but it's a metaphor. Remember, a metaphor is when you make a comparison without telling the person you're talking to that you're making the comparison. You just expect they'll know. So because in ASL, movement upward is associated with gaining more power, getting more money, getting more prestige, the idea of a person struggling to climb a ladder would very clearly indicate that the person is trying to move up, given the context of work and wanting a promotion. On the other hand, if you talk to a person studying for to maybe write a difficult term paper, they might talk about doing research, and they might talk about using the sign analyze and using the sign deep to talk about getting in depth into the material. And then they might act as if they're using a shovel. Now, the sign shovel has nothing to do with research per se, but it does have to do with this metaphor of digging to indicate the idea of doing research or finding out more information about a topic. So they're just expecting you'll understand the metaphor. It was as if they were digging into a book. So, to be clear, an idiom, group of words that you would not be able to understand the meaning of by looking at the individual words. That's different from a culturally laden term, which just is hard to translate between one language and another. And that's different from metaphorical language, which is not set. It's not, there's no set use of it, but it comes up from time to time, and it's based on these metaphors that all the users of a language know and expect.